Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything.
So hello engagers, today we have a repeat guest. I guess we are kind of on a roll. We don't have too many, but we have had a couple recently. And this is a very special guest because it is a repeat guest. It is an educator. It is a fellow podcaster. And hopefully we will get to meet in person and we can actually say that we are real friends for now. For now, we're virtual friends. Isn't that right, Dustin?
Definitely. Thank you for having me on again. I'm super excited to chat with you.
So Dustin, if you want to listen to his episode and again go through his struggles of this fail, see how he came out of it, you want to know about his process, you want to know about all the things that we talk about in our usual episodes, you can go to episode 86. So go to Professor Game, type episode 86 or type Dustin and you will find that episode immediately and you can go on and listen to that. And actually you can have a nice segue if you have some more time and listen to the two episodes one after the other. So if you want his intro, a couple of things have changed in his life and I guess that could be a good place to start. So Dustin, what is slightly or completely different recently for you?
Well, I moved from Taiwan to Los Angeles, so that is a huge change for my wife and I. And I was in Taiwan and I was teaching university students, teaching English as a second language and teaching writing course to international students before I left and doing some consulting at the Ministry of Education there. And now I'm back in Los Angeles and kind of just getting settled in and really excited to be back and to be able to communicate a little easier, but I do really miss Taiwan a lot.
So Dustin, what do you like, very quickly, of course, we don't want to spend the whole episode talking about Taiwan compared to LA, but what can you say is something that you learned, especially on your specialty, board games and games, that is very different that now you realize, because it's in hindsight, you could say, well, when I was in Taiwan, I remember what happened in the US, but now you've had the two back and forth. So what do you feel is like new, different, very different for you? And what could be some key lessons that you brought back from Taiwan?
So there's one thing that maybe kind of relates to your audience as far as building a community through play is we started a board game night at one of my friends' restaurant. It's like a vegan restaurant in Taipei. And one thing we learned is it takes a lot of time. And as I'm moving back here to Los Angeles, we're doing something similar. And I have to remember to be patient because when we first started, the very first lesson or event we had, it's learning language through playing games. So like a language exchange. The first event we had one student show up and it turned into a one-on-one tutoring session with me and the student pretty much. But by the time we left, my wife and I left Taiwan, the restaurant was having to turn away people coming because we were just too full. We didn't have any room for people to play games. And I was just speaking with my friend recently and he said that they've moved it to twice a month instead of once a month. So I think that's a big lesson I learned as far as the aspect of community building and specifically community building through board game nights. Nice. So now you're building your own local community in Los Angeles as well. Is that right? Yeah, we're getting there. Like I said, we just had our first event not too long ago, depending on the release of this episode. And we had 3 people we didn't know and a lot of friends and family come by. I think it was successful because we did have a lot of people inquire about our next one. So we're excited to kind of get going with a nice, awesome board game community here too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's very, very exciting. And there's, of course, as well, something that I like about that is given, of course, our area, it's also an opportunity to continue learning and, seeing new things, seeing people interact with games, potentially make some small experiments on how, people experiment these things. What can you learn from them? How can you use these strategies for other things like education, which again is what we are mainly focused on. So I think it's a very, very nice opportunity and something that engagers, it's something that you might be willing or interested in considering. Like, why not build your own local community of people who are playing, again, board games, video games, sports? Try to build something around that, especially for you to be observant of what's the dynamics that are going on. You can see how are the people interacting, the social aspect with it, which is very, very, very crucial to any of these experiences. So I think it's a very nice opportunity and a very good idea as well. So engagers, if you're interested in doing any of this, let us know. I mean, we would be keen on, I'm not sure if we will be able to help a lot, but maybe some recommendations, maybe some local that we know from that place as well. If you're building your community, just drop us an email. Drop me at least an email. If you can log in to professorgame.com, you can subscribe to the email list, reply to any of the emails that I send, and I will definitely read it and hopefully have a chance to give you an answer as well. Which, to be honest, and to be fair to this date, I have had the chance to answer to every single email, and I'm proud of that, to be able to still do that. So what do you think about that, Dustin? Do you think that's important? Like, what has been your experience with these things, and how do you, what are some lessons or things that you might have learned from that?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what you said, I'm happy to help as well. And also, doing something like this is the best. I think my favorite way to do research is through playing games. So you get to play a lot of different games, and a lot of times when I play games, I think about how I can maybe modify some of them or use some of the game mechanics in my lessons or activities in school too. So I think it's an awesome opportunity to do a bit of research as well.
Fantastic. So Dustin, let's move on to something else that also has happened since we last had a conversation on this podcast as well, and it has to do with Worlds XP. When we were chatting last time, as far as I remember, you were sort of in part of the initial, developments. You were starting to do some stuff, and you were experimenting a lot. Since then, many things have happened. So I'd like to, for you to give us at least a snapshot of what that evolution has been, because I know, I'm not sure if we talked about it, but I know you started this in your wife's classroom. So can you run us through a bit of that history, what has been going on, and then we will get into, of course, some of the key lessons learned from that experience.
Definitely. I think what you mentioned, we did start it in my wife's classroom, and that was the, I guess, birth of it. Well, maybe if I take it back to a semester before that was where gamifying a course started. So I initially gamified one of my university level courses. And what I did is I took Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. So this is a board game, and it's themed like Sherlock Holmes, and you are playing a detective group and you're trying to solve the crime before Sherlock Holmes. So at the end of the crime, once you finally figure out, you look back at the steps that Sherlock Holmes took to solve the crime. And a lot of times you are not even close to beating him. That's kind of the biggest challenge with that game. But why it's great and why I used it to gamify my course is it's a great English learning tool for different things like reading comprehension and collaboration and communication in groups to figure out different pieces of the puzzle. So the language is pretty complex. So I had to reword or rewrite a lot of the language to make it a bit more simple, or at least at the level of my students. And how I gamified it, students earn knowledge points throughout the course for completing assignments, for coming to class, for doing like different bonus kind of side quests. And those knowledge points they were able to use to receive more clues in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. So in the game, you go to different places, or you interview different people, or you do other things to kind of gather information to solve the case. And in order to gather that information, you need a certain number of knowledge points in your group to get that clue. So I think you needed 200 knowledge points, and then you would get a new clue, 200 knowledge points as your group, and you would get a new clue to continue solving the case. I think this worked really well in a way that it gave students the opportunity to kind of get to know each other a little bit in class. At a university level, you're not really as close to your classmates as you are maybe K through 12. It was also great for students' reading comprehension because they had to read through the different clues, the different interviews, the different pieces of the case. And that way, some students that maybe didn't understand parts of it, their teammates would help explain to them in English what was going on or why this clue was significant. So I think it was really, really good in that regard to help their language skills outside of just what we were learning in class. So this was an add-on to what we were doing in class. It wasn't a requirement, but we did set aside some time to work on it in class. Maybe about every other week for about 30 minutes. We had 3-hour-long classes. So we had a lot of class time where we could kind of set aside a little bit of time for this as well.
Very interesting. And of course, strictly speaking, some people will come up and say, well, that's not gamification. That's game-based learning. And that's all good.
Right.
I think the definitions are important for many things, but I don't think we should get hung up on those. I think that there is so much that we can profit in the best of senses from this world that, getting hung up on that is definitely not the way to go. But anyways, so that was how it was born. That was how you started to do this sort of formally in your classroom. Next, I don't want to, spend too much time in the episode sort of when you did it with your wife, because our listeners can also go to Board Gaming with Education and find the episodes. I'm sure you remember the names of those episodes. I don't. I did listen to them, but I don't remember the names or the numbers. So you can guide us there, and then we'll see what happened. I mean, give us a quick gist of what that looked like, and then we'll move on to what's been happening after that, because there's a lot of exciting news as well.
Yeah, and just to go back to your definition or your comment on gamification, game-based learning, the activities were definitely game-based learning, and I think with language learning, there's kind of that unique take where almost everything can be considered game-based learning because they're improving their language. But I guess the course, in a way, was gamified outside of those activities where they earn the knowledge points. And as far as my wife's class, that's where we started to consider how to gamify a course to where it could be universally adapted to other content areas, other age levels. And with that, we started Worlds XP. At the time, it was just called the Gamification Kit. But we have 4 episodes called the Gamification Diaries, where my wife and I talk about our process for implementing.
That's it. That was exactly what I was looking for. The Gamification Diaries. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so in those 4 episodes, you actually hear us talk about the process in real time. So we're going through our decisions we make and some of the challenges and some of the mistakes we make through implementing the kit. One mistake maybe I can share is, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, but maybe for some that are new to gamification, was using a leaderboard. And it worked for 95% of the class it worked, but there was one student out of the class that just got really discouraged with the leaderboard. And he kept trying to give away his experience points because he just didn't care anymore about the leaderboard because he saw it as a way to never really catch up. But I would highly recommend checking out those episodes to kind of learn about the process for what we did, the mistakes we made, and the challenges we overcame.
Yeah, actually, I think they were very interesting and lots of things to learn from. I mean, there was directly all the, sort of the experience that you had. I do remember those episodes where you were describing, it was almost, again, like a diary, like the title says, where you were describing what the whole experience was like. And it's also nice because you are well, at least at that point, you were the guy who was really very much into game-based learning and gamification, and your wife was like learning, the ropes, so to speak. And it was very interesting to have that perspective as well. So I think those are very, very nice and interesting episodes, so that you can go on. And then I know that the idea that you were having there was to sort of build some sort of kit, some sort of package or something, like experimenting from that classroom that you had with where you were helping your wife, and taking that into some sort of kit package or something that could be used by other people in Taiwan and of course all around the world. And how did that go? What's the history? How did that evolve? And I know we shouldn't tell the end of the stories, but I can tell, because you will already can find it on the internet, that then you went into a Kickstarter campaign. So I would like to see what that meant, like what that looked like, and of course some of the lessons learned for you. What were maybe some of the pivots? How did you sort of try to universalize this kit so that it was not only for a classroom like yours or your wife's? Like I want to get into the nuts and bolts of that if possible.
For sure. I think I'll get to kind of some of the challenges, but maybe if I start with where the idea came from, was when I started to think about gamifying different courses or different learning environments. There's a lot of great resources out there and a lot of great examples. A lot of guests that have been on your show. I think you've had like Lee Sheldon on your show, John and Tracy. So a lot of them have good examples of how they've gamified their courses. But what was missing were the components, like the actual physical components that you could give to students to gamify their class, or gamify your class. I'm sorry. So I wanted to put something together that was, you just purchase or you get this kit and it's ready to go for your classroom. Obviously, not all classes are the same. Not all learning environments are the same. So we had to implement ways to modify parts of the kit as well. So that's where I decided to create Worlds XP. And the Worlds XP, it's a gamification guide, I would say, where it talks about core components that you can implement and some things that you can maybe leave out, or some things that you can add on depending on what kind of style you would want to gamify your classroom in. So the main component of the kit, or I guess, I don't want to say my favorite, but one of the things I really like about the kit are the integrated learning adventures, so students at the beginning of their gamified instruction, they design a character, and through the design there's different characters that you can choose and give them a unique personality, give them a unique background. You develop relationships with other students in the classroom, and then you develop a relationship as a whole class. So you decide how you knew other students, you decide how you became an adventure group, and then you go on different RPG adventures. And through these RPG adventures, there are opportunities to integrate learning outcomes, and we kind of explain how to do that in different scenarios. And then throughout the learning, or throughout the time that you use the kit, you can earn XP, and those are ways to kind of reward positive behavior in your classroom. You can also give students different roles once they reach a certain level, so different responsibilities in your class. You can also give them rewards, like different items. One item that we have is called the Flute of Design, so they're able to choose their own groups when you do group work. Or another one is the Future Goggles, and that's something my wife really liked to use, where instead of having to read a book for her students' writing diary or reading log, they could watch Netflix. So they could watch a TV show and then write about the plot or the characters in the TV show. So a lot of great ways to kind of gamify the classroom environment, different ways to reward positive behavior. So that's kind of where it's at now. We have different unique art for some of the characters, and that's something maybe I can get into here, as well as the Kickstarter and all of that.
Sure, please. Because I mean, before we get into the Kickstarter, I did have a question, because I know your experience, and especially when you were in Taiwan, of course, you were mainly being into the English as a second language professor or teacher, depending on the setting. Hearing from the way you describe these things, it sounds like, especially the Netflix example, which of course, again, being an English as a second language teacher at that time makes a huge amount of sense. But is this applicable as well to people who are in other subject areas? Like, can a history teacher or a math teacher or a biology teacher pick this up and use it as well? Would it make sense for them?
Yes, definitely. I think so. We've had a few teachers playtest this already, and we've had second grade, a teacher in, I believe she's in either Italy or Greece. I can't remember which one, but somewhere in Europe, and she teaches second graders. We've had a couple gifted teachers, so they teach gifted students, use this as well. We've had a history teacher. No, I'm sorry. He's also an English teacher use it, and he did a preview of it. Sorry, and you can check out his preview. He's called The Hungry Gamer. He usually reviews board games, but I asked him if he could review this and think about ways he might implement it. And that's actually one thing he brought up in his video. The one thing that I'm still trying to kind of work through, and it's maybe one of the challenges that the Kickstarter I ran into with the Kickstarter and the campaign is its in-depth system, and the manual is pretty long, but you don't need to consult the entire manual to get started. So we've developed a quick start guide, which is, I'm looking at it here, just 6 pages. So it's written in the style of or at least attempted to, in a way of a video game, to where as you play a video game, you're kind of playing as you're learning to play. So this quick start guide is a way to get started without having to go to the manual to see what you need to do, but you're learning and you're doing it as you go. Obviously, as a teacher, you kind of want to read through maybe the entire quick start guide before you get started, so you kind of know the end of the tunnel, because in a video game, it's a bit different than our responsibility we have for our students.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. So that's the next thing that I wanted to get into. And one of the key lessons, I guess, is that one of having something which is quick to grasp and to be able at least to test. Is there anything like from that Kickstarter campaign, and of course all the playtesting that you did before, all what that came during the campaign as well? Could you draw, aside from that, any other further conclusions as well from that? Maybe what would you do different if you had to do it, or tell your past self, like, oh, don't do it this way, do it this other way?
I think I got too excited. I was really, really pumped to put it out on Kickstarter, and I wouldn't say it was unsuccessful. We canceled the project, but we raised close to $1,000. We got the word out about the World's XP, and we did some things with the platform Kickstarter that I was hoping would take another direction, but we launched it in November on Kickstarter, and that's a really slow month for Kickstarter. But what happened, and so I was hoping to take advantage of that slow month by being one of the few projects out there, but what happened is actually a lot of projects launched around the same time as mine. And instead of getting a lot of exposure that I was hoping for, it got very little. A lot of other projects that were looking to be well-funded did not do so well during this time as well. So it was a tough time also for teachers. And that's one thing I was not teaching when I was getting ready for the launch. I was transitioning between Taiwan and Los Angeles, and I was not in the school. So I was not around teachers during Thanksgiving in the States that were just trying to get through the end of the semester. They're not really looking for materials or resources for their teaching. So we're hoping, we will be relaunching, or at least have something ready in the summer, whether it's on Kickstarter or it is a print-on-demand version of the game. But we will be back on Kickstarter with the project, and we're also looking for more playtesters. So this is an invitation to any of your listeners. If you're interested, you can send me an email, and I'm happy to send the print to play files to you. And all I ask is that you provide me some sort of feedback, negative or positive, And if you're interested in receiving like a physical kit, send me an email. We can talk about that as well. I do have limited resources there, but I'm happy to send it out to anyone willing to try out Worlds XP.
Very interesting and very open. So gamifiers, engagers out there, if this is something that you might be interested in, please get in touch with Dustin. Talking about that, Dustin, how can we get in touch with you? Because I'm sure some of the people have already listened to the previous episode, but a refresher would be very timely right now.
Definitely. My email is podcast@boardgamingwitheducation.com, or the main social media, Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, Board Game with Education. I know a lot of my students are on TikTok these days, but I don't have a TikTok account yet.
Not yet. Cool. So if you're interested in any of these things, please do contact Dustin, because I'm sure there are many things to learn from that experience, and many applications that you could have in your own learning experiences as well. And Dustin, before we move on and go back to our usual daily routine, I wanted to make we have always a section whenever we can of asking one random question that comes from the audience. So I am clicking around here to find out which that will be. Okay, fantastic. This question comes from Eric Dumas. He asks, how is the disconnect managed between learning through play and testing knowledge not through play? So the comment he included here, he says, I think it's sometimes quote unquote unfair to train someone using one strategy, but test them using a different framework. And this is particularly evident in education. He says that his kids learn to spell words aloud, but are then tested by writing down the words. So what do you think about that? What's your take, Dustin?
Oh man, that's a really good question. And what jumps into my mind, because you gave that example, it's not game related. So it's more on the education system in Asia. So I don't know if that would pertain, but I'm going to see if I can think about an answer about games. Well, let me answer.
No, I mean the example is, I guess, that he's trying to make it more sort of touchable. The thing of, you learn using a game, but then you're tested on a written test with, you have to write down an essay, which has, it could be argued that it does have nothing to do with the game that you played previously, even though you learned all of the things that you might be tested on or not. So I'm guessing that that's the question that I'm guessing that he's trying to get at is, how do you plug together these two situations where you learn in one way, but then you are graded in a different one?
I don't know if I have the best answer for that. I just can speak to my experience in teaching in Taiwan, and this is something the Taiwanese education system is well aware of, and they're making changes, is that through language learning and English language learning, they're tested on their proficiency of English through written exams and listening exams, but they're not really tested on their proficiency to communicate with someone in English, or their proficiency to understand a task and be able to undertake that task. So as a teacher, I really focus on things that are task-based learning when it comes to language learning. I guess my recommendation, if we want to try to eliminate that disconnect, is to try to find other assessments that kind of target what you're trying to learn. Because if you are a language learner and you're trying to move to a new country, taking an exam is not going to be what you need, right? You need to be able to communicate with people when you do your day-to-day tasks, or when you get on the subway, you need to be able to read the subway signs. So if a test is able to do that, you might be able to implement it, but I think we can think of a lot better ways, like through a conversation with someone, and role playing through conversations and seeing if they can get through that. So simulating that experience versus a test.
I have to agree with what you say, because I am a firm believer that there is always something better to do than, the tests that we've been always doing. But it is also true that that's easier for us as educators, as teachers, as professors, because it's what we've always done. And, relatively speaking, compared to something else, it's a lot more difficult. So is there because I don't know, maybe you feel differently, but that requires a bit more, or a lot more, depending on the case, a lot more work on behalf of the teacher. What would you say when somebody speaks up and says, "Oh yeah, that all looks good, but how do I do it? I'm already packed full of activities and da da da." And I think I kind of know where you're going towards, but I would really like the audience to see your perspective as well.
So one thing I did to accommodate my students in Taiwan I had writing courses with 50 plus students, and as a teacher, I did not want to take home 50 essays each month or whatever, however many I asked them to turn in. And I wanted to be sure they also are writing, because that's the best way to improve. So what I did is I implemented a flipped classroom, because I thought that was the best way to accommodate them, where I would give them video lectures. And then in class, I would meet them one-on-one and talk about their writing. And we could talk about their specific, different grammar struggles or vocabulary or anything they're writing structure, anything they're kind of struggling with. And that way you kind of have the content for future classes as well when you do a flipped classroom structure. So maybe implementing something similar. I don't know. Again, I can speak to my background. So if I was testing, my example, the simulations, maybe for that week or for that course, if we were doing a course on moving abroad, we could do a flipped classroom structure where for 2 weeks, maybe they did their lessons online. And then in class, we kind of did the simulation experiment or role play.
That sounds great, and a great way as well to, run around the problem of the time dedication, because that part of the flipped classroom, and I agree, is something that is mostly reusable, but also very improvable, because you do it once and maybe one of the things that didn't work too well, that's the only thing that you re-record. And there's a lot of things and strategies. We could talk about that. However, at least this time we are running out of time. So once again, Dustin, let us know where we can find you, where we can find your podcast as well. How can we, if they're listening to this podcast, chances are you are already listening to it through a podcasting app. Is your podcast as well on every app? How can we find it? What's the name once again? And where can we find you on the world of the internet?
So I'd say boardgamingwitheducation.com is the best place to start. We do have an email community, and we feature different articles throughout the month. So at the end of January, we'll release a newsletter with different articles on game-based learning, games, and education that I've came across in the month of January. And also I will send out emails about playtesting and updates about Worlds XP. So that's the best way. I only email about maybe 3 times a month at most. So it's not too spammy. And then Board Game with Education, the podcast, any podcast platform. Again, social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And the email, if you want to reach me, send me a message personally, you can always send a message and reply to the newsletter or podcast at boardgamingwitheducation.com.
Fantastic. Thank you very much once again, Dustin, for dedicating this time to the engagers so that we can, grab a lot of the learning and the lessons that you got from your own experience. However, for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over.
Thank you, Rob, very much for having me on again, and this was really great.
Engagers, it is fantastic to have you around, because being here, having this podcast, having the guests around now only makes sense with you. So why not? Let's connect on Twitter, for example. So you can let me know who would you like to have as guests, what we can help you with, what questions do you have, what are, things you're looking forward in this world of games. Let me know. Find me at my Twitter account in professorgame.com/Twitter. I'm always sharing content on gamification, game-based learning, game thinking, especially for our special topic of education. And hey, wait a second. Don't click continue. Don't click continue and go to your next mission. Would you like to know who is Joel Comm and what is his fun formula? then all you have to do is subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.